Now, one thing that's I've been criticized of recently is this idea of the ovulatory shift being something that is like not replicatable anymore. And first of all, I think that's horseshit, because I can point to dozens of studies, recent studies, that have pretty much confirmed at least aspects of ovulatory shift. Ovulatory shift is the idea that women are more attracted to certain, let's say, masculinity types at different phases of their menstrual cycle, which, by the way, has been confirmed even biologically. Women's brain structure actually rearranges itself during menstruation. So from one phase to another phase. I've shown the stats on here before. And this is a recent study too. This is like 2022. So that's one. And like I've said before, I don't think it's going to be evolutionary psychology that proves dual mating strategy. It's going to be evolutionary biology. It's going to be looking at the physical aspects. It's going to be quantitative data, not qualitative data. There's a difference between those two. And so when I'm looking at people trying to debunk the works of like Marty Hazelton, who's been doing this shit for like at UCLA of all places for like the last 30 some odd years, I look at this and I like, I mean, even prominent Evo Psych people are trying to sort of like backpedal away from this because it's unpopular. If I can't go on this show without people wanting to divert my traffic to Justin Manbun Baldini, what do you think it would be like if you were like, say, Stephen Gangstad, or you're one of these evolutionary psychologists, or even David Buss, right? Who has, for the past probably 30 years or 40 years, in the case of David Buss, who's been talking about this and is essentially reinforcing and backing up a lot of this stuff. Imagine you're that guy and you're going to be included on that terrorist watch list. You're going to be included in that DHS, designation. Right. So would it not then behoove people like that to sort of backpedal on this stuff and try to soft sell things and try to find ways to sort of, lessen the blow of something like, say, as incriminating as like ovulatory shift? Yeah, of course they would. You're going to watch your ass. I mean, I can remember when I forget the name of the guy who was at the college, but there was, I think it was a TED talk, and we were talking about this. There's a guy who was like, it wasn't Steven Pinker, but it was somebody like Steven Pinker. But even Steven Pinker, like he was saying, there are definite gender differences between men and women. And here they are, black and white. When we talk about like transgender men, in women's sports, when we talk about that, you could see it right there, plain as day. I mean, it's reality. But we still want to cling to this idea of the blank slate. We want to cling to the idea of social constructionism. So when Steven Pinker says, well, men tend to be more interested in things and women tend to be more interested in people. And when we look at the data and the research that shows that women are more interested in personal security, and they're more interested in redistributive policies when it comes to resources and money and things like that. And they tend to be more egalitarian and more socialist, whereas men tend to be more capitalist and more hierarchical. And it's part of our brain structures, and it's just something that, genetically, this is just how we evolved to be. That's when you get put on a DHS watch list. That's when you get an NGO that has to silence you and put a gag around your mouth. That's when you get that's when they got to take matters into their own hands. So keeping that in mind, when I talk about ovulatory shift, and then people say, well, this hasn't replicated. It's the crisis of replicability, right? Or something like that. And by the way, that crisis started right around the same time that women started like inserting themselves and coming into academia in great waves. Look what the enrollment rate is of men versus women even today. Right? And it's only going up for women, and it's coming down for men. So do you think that that's going to have any effect on replicability? Do you think that's going to have any effect on funding for that research? Do you think that's going to if it's all women doing this research, would they be motivated to try to debunk ovulatory shift? Of course they would. Right? Of course they're going to go start looking for shit like that. But again, I think that even when they're trying to debunk ovulatory shift, it's because they're looking at it from the perspective of what is going to put men and women together to have babies and be pair bonded. And I think that asks the wrong fucking question, which is why I keep saying we need to unplug from the matrix of relationships as being the litmus test for our research and our studies. And it's never going to catch on because there's no money in it. And the women involved in that research, the largely majority of women involved in that research, are never going to want to take it up. Women aren't going to do what's not in their best interests. I've said that about politics. I've said that about science. I've said that about academia. I've said that about like, corporate workplace. Women are not going to try to do things that are against their interests. When women come into politics, when they come into any kind of political power, the first thing they do is not try to do something for the greater good of the people and their constituents. It's for whatever benefits the sisterhood. So then it's going to be like, oh, we need to have pregnancy leave. Oh, we need to have this. It's whatever is going to their test of female politicians is not how many people they can help. It's how many women they can help, at least from the jump. Okay. Or how can they keep those benefits, keep them going? So that's essentially, like, if you think about it, that's why women get into politics in the first place, because they have something to prove. I'm the first woman to ever be a congresswoman. I'm the first woman to ever be a senator. I'm the first female president. By the way, Kamala Harris is the first female president. Don't believe me? She had to be sworn into office when Joe Biden had to go. What did they put him under? They had to put him under for some surgery. So he was like anesthetized, and they had to put him out for the surgery. During that time, they had to swear her in as the president. So Kamala Harris is actually the very first American president by technicality, but it's true. Like that. So I was actually right about that prediction for one day. It was one day. It's a technicality. You are correct, sir. So anyways, so I'm going to show you this video here really quick, because I think this sort of gets to the point. This is Dr. Jordan Peterson, and I forget the name of the other chick who's on the other side of this, but I felt like this kind of would be a good jumping off point here. I believe this is it.
When we take the birth control pill, what it does is, instead of allowing you to cycle between these two hormones, because you start with this big increase in estrogen, which is coordinating all of the activities related to sex and conception, because this is the period in the cycle in which sex can lead to conception.
Mm-hmm.
And
how long a period is that?
It's about so that period of time is about 5 to 7 days. So about 5 days prior to ovulation, and then within 24 hours of ovulation, during that window, which we call the fertile window, sex can lead to conception.
And that's how many days a month?
It's about 5 to 7.
Yeah, right. Okay.
So, and then after ovulation, a little temporary endocrine structure forms from the empty egg follicle, and it begins releasing women's other primary sex hormone, which is progesterone. And when that hormone is being released, it tends to make us sleepier. It makes us hungrier. It makes us, it lowers our testosterone levels. It does a bunch of things physiologically that are helping prepare women's bodies for pregnancy.
Okay, so just in a nutshell for this, she has essentially described exactly what I have said since certainly before this, but like since I went on the 21 convention. My very first like public speech on the 21 convention was a speech called Hypergamy Micro to Macro. This is almost to the letter what I said during this, which is there is the proliferative phase, which is they call it when ovulation is taking place. It's usually within the first slide. It's in the first like it's at day 10 or day 12 is when women and the ovulation happens, and women become more proceptive to sexuality. And again, it's just to head some people off at the pass. It doesn't mean that she's going to, and I've said this before, it doesn't mean she's going to go cheat on you, but it does mean that she's probably going to want to have sex more. She's proceptive to sex, meaning like she'll go out and look for it. If a woman is in a satisfactory relationship, she's probably going to want to fuck her boyfriend or her husband more. Got it? Okay. It's not a license to go and cheat. However, if she is not satisfied in that relationship, the odds are higher that she might cheat during that phase, depending on a lot of different contexts and everything, circumstances that are going on. I said this as far back as 2017. Okay, actually, I said it before in the very first book. I guess 2011. We technically, because I put that stuff in the book. So you got that. She's basically saying exactly to the fucking letter what I have said in the Rational Male, talked about in 2017, and still talking about today. Okay, this is where she's at. Okay, this is essentially Dr. Marty Hazelton's ovulatory shift theory, and what she's saying right here, biologically, not evolutionary psychology, evolutionary biology is true. All of the things that she's saying are provable, are factual, are easy to determine. You already know what progesterone levels are. You know what's happening in that woman's biochemistry at that point. Also, as I said before, during menstruation, women's brain architecture, the function that physically changes, white, like we should say, right? White matter and everything moves around. Okay. It changes because it puts women into the most optimal condition to conceive, to be fertile. So when I listen to tradcons today say women need to get off of birth control, and it's ruining women, right? And the birth control, like we just saw here in a second in the chat, birth control is a psyop from the Rockefellers or the elves, right? The whatever it is, right? So when I'm listening to like Lauren Chen, Lauren Southern, name the conservatives, the tradcon conservative female pundit out there saying women need to get off of birth control because it messes up your natural flow or messes up your brain chemistry or whatever. Those people need to watch this right here so that when I'm listening to other people talking about, oh, ovulatory shift it's not really a thing. Well, if that's the case, then this is all bullshit. Everything she just said, all this whole entire conversation with Jordan Peterson getting off of birth control, it shouldn't make any fucking difference whatsoever if, well, ovulatory shift doesn't replicate. No, it does. But you know what? The biological aspects of it do. So let's continue.
Right. And prepare ourselves for the possibility that an egg might implant. And so women generally are less likely to be going out and doing risky things. They're more likely to avoid contaminants. So women's disgust sensitivity increases. There's all of these things that go on that are essentially preparing our body
That's when
for
they
this.
have maximal postcoital regret.
I bet that yeah, that's so funny. And so you get this waxing and waning between these two.
Hey, did you guys catch that? Did you catch that part? We said post-coital regret, meaning like after the chick fucks you, she gets buyer's remorse, right? There's a red pill. But thanks for confirming that, Dr. Jordan Peterson. I'm actually gonna build up JP here. Yeah, that's when women get regret, right? Because they're like, oh, right after the egg has dropped. And usually, like, this is the way I explained it in my talk, right? There is from the day 1 to about day 12. But at day 10 to 12, that's when the egg is dropping. That's when women are more proceptive. That's when they're looking for more masculinized features in men. They're looking for a hot alpha guy in the foam cannon party to in Cancun on spring break to fuck. You know, I was drunk, he was cute, and one thing led to another, right? Looking for the hot guy they want to fuck. They want to have monkey sex with this guy. He's there. He's available. She might cheat. She might not. Maybe the guy that she's with, that she wants to have sex with, she happens to be with because she's in a satisfying relationship. Again, we're using relationships as the fucking litmus test here. But be that as it may, this is the time to, like, between day 1 and, well, really day 10 and day 13, 14, 12, somewhere in there. That's when women tend to be more interested in the jerk, in the guy with the dark triad, personality traits, the guy who's jacked, the guy who can fucking, ride her to glory. That's what she's interested in. Then the egg drops. And now what happens? Oh, everything goes into nesting mode because with respect to the hormonal birth control, women tend to go into a nesting mode because the body, as she was saying here, thinks and believes that it is pregnant or it might be pregnant. And so there's a biochemical change once again in the brain, right? Provable, seen it already, got the data set for that. There's a physical change that happens. Why? Because the body thinks it might be pregnant. And then she goes into nesting mode. And now she wants her friends to talk to her. And now she cries. And now she watches sad movies. And now she has Ben and Jerry's, a big quartered Ben and Jerry's, right? And she calls her emotional tampon beta bucks, orbiters. Oh, he's such a bastard. He fucked me. I can't believe it. I would never. That's when the betas like comes flocking around, right? Like, oh, I would never treat you like that, baby. Why do you keep going back to him? Blah, 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 blah. Right. Well, the reason why those beta orbiters are drawn into all that is because she's in her down cycle. She's now what's the luteal phase of the menstrual cycle. Okay. It's when it gets to the point where she's going to flush all of that blood out. We have PMS at that point and just sort of, but essentially what she's describing here is what I've said. And this is, I'm not doing this. I'm not pulling this out of my ass. This is actually in the book Hormonal by Dr. Marty Hazelton. That's where I'm getting it. And I presume she's probably getting some of it herself from Dr. Hazelton. But Dr. Hazelton has suggested that like when a woman gets pregnant, she goes into the nesting phase. Like she knows that she's pregnant. So now she's got to go and prepare the room and put up the curtains and put up the pink and a blue balloon to see if it's a boy or girl. Like that's when she gets emotional. That's when her body is swimming in the hormones and she wants ice cream and pickles, like that kind of shit. That's the nesting phase because she needs to be secure. Women want to, like, overall, women need long-term security. And part of that is the fact that she's going to be pregnant for 9 months with a baby, and then she's going to have to nurture that baby afterwards. And the number one thing women need is they need security. They need a strong guy to protect them from invading tribes, saber-toothed tigers, whatever the fuck we're going to call it, whatever euphemism. I don't mean actual fucking saber-toothed tigers. I mean like fucking, outside threats, okay? They want to know that the lights are going to stay on and the food's going to show up from Uber Eats, whatever. Okay. But the external threats are going to be taken care of. That's why she needs a fucking strong ass guy who's dominant, who's protective, parentally invested because he knows it's his fucking kid, hopefully. And he's going to provide for her. Provisioning, protection, and parental investment. That's the nesting phase. But that's when a woman is pregnant. When she's not pregnant, or hormonal birth control convinces her body that she might be pregnant all the fucking time, she might be in a nesting phase all the time, or she might go through a small, like sort of a micro nesting phase. And that's really what Hazelton suggested. I've said this on occasion, is when women go from the perceptive phase, they go to the proliferative phase, which is when right before the egg drops, and then it drops and they go to the luteal phase where everything flushes out. That luteal phase is really defined by a sort of a micro nesting phase. And that's when she wants to talk to her friends. And then of course she gets PMS, she floods, she gets cramps, she washes out, and then she gets bitchy. And this is theory. This is not, don't know if this is proven, but the idea is that the reason why women get PMS and they get bitchy during their period is to force away the beta males. All the people who came to her rescue during her sort of micro nesting, now we can't have them orbiting me right now because I got to get ready to go back into my proliferative phase so I can fuck the alphas again. And then the whole cycle repeats itself. She's going to talk about that in a few terms here.
Hormones that are organizing our bodies for two different activities: implantation and conception, sex and conception, and then implantation and pregnancy. And we go in between these two states. And each of these hormonal states is associated with different types of psychological patterns and physiological patterns. I mean, even they've done studies where they scan women's brains every day across the cycle and take hormone measures. And it's like you see things like white matter.
Thanks, Trader. Much appreciated.
Density increasing when estrogen is high. Spinal, you get new dendritic spines in the hippocampus when estrogen is present. And then these things retreat when you're under the control of progesterone. And so we experience all these changes. Right. And that's a very normal part of being a woman. And when you take the birth control pill, what it does is you get a daily dose of a relatively low level of synthetic estradiol, so estrogen, and a relatively high level of synthetic progesterone, which is called a progestin because it's not biologically identical. And this mimics the state that a woman's body is in during that second half of the menstrual cycle when conception isn't possible. And what this does is it sends a signal to the hypothalamus not to stimulate the ovaries to produce a new egg, because it's essentially waiting to see what happens with the one that was just ovulated. And so when you're taking the pill, you get the same daily dose every day of this synthetic hormonal state that's kind of keeping you.
So in principle, the body's reacting as if the woman has been sexually satiated in the most fundamental way. She might be pregnant.
Yes, she might be pregnant, essentially, is what that is saying.
And so one of the logical consequences of that correct me if I'm wrong, she should be less interested in sex.
Bingo.
But then this also ties into the change in her preference for men.
Yes.
So let's talk about that a little bit. Because, well, one of the things that really shocked me when I came across this probably 10, 15 years ago was that there was pronounced variability in the faces that women found attractive across the menstrual cycle. And so if you take...
Okay, so this is one of the points of contention you're going to find from the people who are anti-ovulatory shift or are anti-dual mating strategy. They're going to say, this has not been replicated. It doesn't matter. Facial symmetry, facial masculinity it hasn't replicated. And so therefore it's been debunked, and you can just go home and I don't know what it means now, but fuck everything. Fuck all these red pill guys who think that that's what it's about. Well, there's other tests that they've done besides facial masculinity. Just throwing that out. That's one experiment amongst dozens over the course of 30 plus years. So let's keep that in perspective before we go on with this, because people are going to say that it doesn't matter what phase of the cycle, they either love them or hate them, right? Well, if that's the case, then everything she's saying and everything he's just said right now is all horseshit. We can just throw it away and disregard it. Okay. All that stuff, it doesn't make any difference, at least according to like people who are sort of anti-ovulatory shift. They don't think that any of this really makes any difference. And really what it's doing is it's trying to support this, sort of blank slate bullshit realism again. The fact of the matter is that they wouldn't be having this conversation. Oddly enough, this conversation here is really meant to be as a deterrent of women using hormonal birth control. But oddly enough, they make the case for ovulatory shift in the midst of saying, well, women should get off of birth control. Well, the long and the short of this is, and you'll get this here later on in the rest of the video, is that they're going to say, well, women should go off the pill so they can be more accurate in their assumptions of the guys that they're actually aroused by and attracted to. Because what happens is once women go off of the pill, then so that they can actually have a child, then they come to realize that the weesh beta male piece of shit, soft face, soft male that they married and thought was so attractive. Well, they only found him attractive because, well, you're on this synthetic hormone that makes you think that your body's always, you're preferring men who you wouldn't necessarily prefer. Okay. So you have two choices, anti-ovulatory shift guy. Either they're wrong or there is something to ovulatory shift. When women go off of the pill, their libidos increase, but they also report wanting to get with a guy who's not like the guy that they ended up marrying while they were on hormonal birth control. Now, I have my own estimates of this, but I want to leave this to Jordan Peterson and this, I forget the name, the lady's name, the researcher here, because they're making the case for ovulatory shift by saying you should get off of hormonal birth control. So what is it? Are there actions that why would it make any difference? Why would women have any struggles with who they were going to marry, who they were with in the long term, or who they were trying to have a child with? They go off of they go off of hormonal birth control, and now suddenly they look at their husband or their boyfriend, whoever they're fucking to have kids with, and they realize, you know what, I'm not really into this dude. Because now I'm off the hormonal birth control, and now my cycle's gone back to regular, and suddenly maybe I find the lumberjack more attractive than this, weesh little programmer guy that I got with. Who knows, right? Well, you got to pick one.
Can lead to
there is pronounced variability in the faces that women found attractive across the menstrual cycle. And so if you take photographs of the same man and you widen or narrow the jaw, widen jaws is a sign of more classically dominant. It's the wrong way of thinking about it. Competent, confident, masculine faces. You can do it with the same man. And the women who are in their most fertile periods prefer the wider jawed men.
The 40 days leading up to Easter.
I was going to scrub past this real quick. This is their ad. Sorry.
Terrifying if that's the case.
Right. No, it's
a real problem, because it might be that women on the pill really don't like masculine men. That's probably a problem, because we have a lot of tension between women and men in our society, and we have no idea how much that's driven by the fact that the pill is transforming the manner in which females perceive the most masculine men. I mean, it's a terrifying if that's the case.
Right. No.
You know what's more terrifying is the fact that I am on a DHS watch list and an NGO wants to redirect my fucking traffic for saying pretty much the same goddamn thing that Jordan Peterson is saying right here. That's what's scary. You know what's really scary is having access to this shit and actually connecting dots that people don't want to fucking connect. That's pretty scary. But be that as it may, the thing here is, if women get off of birth control, do they find other like more masculinized men more attractive? Do they want a guy who's like got more muscle mass, right? Do they want a guy who's taller? Do they want a guy who's like got a more dominant personality? And the answer, at least according to this researcher here, is yes. So if you're going to say that ovulatory shift doesn't track and it doesn't replicate and everything, well, what does replicate is biology, hormones, and the effect that those hormones and that endocrinology, whatever, that chemical cocktail has on women's behaviors, on women's preferences, on women's arousal and or non-arousal, depending on the case. That is right there, provable. So would it not stand to reason that evolution would find ways biochemically to predispose women to want to have babies? Would it? Because that's really what this kind of boils down to.
It's very provocative, right? That's the word I would use. It's incredibly provocative because what research has been showing now for about 20 years that when women are in the point in the cycle when estrogen is high, that's associated with an increased preference for testosterone cues, like you said. Vocal, facial, and behavioral masculinity are things that women are really zeroing in on right near high fertility in the cycle. And this, of course, begs the question, well, then what happens if a woman is on hormonal birth control and is never in the estrogen dominant phase of her cycle? Then what happens? And researchers have since asked that question. And what they tend to find is that women who are on hormonal birth control desire a somewhat less masculine male face and male voice. And there's been some research even showing that if women chose their partners when they're on hormonal birth control and then discontinue it, that this can lead to changes in how they perceive and how attracted they are to their partner.
Yeah, I read that, tell me if this is right, that if they picked an attractive partner, when they're off the pill, they find them even more attractive. But if they picked a less desirable partner, when they're off the pill, they find them even less desirable.
Bingo.
So it seems to, so that's
Bingo.
right. It magnifies the consequence of their choices.
Yeah, it's like all of a sudden the blinders were off. And so now they can, if they chose somebody who that they found attractive and because they weren't really paying that much attention to that or weren't prioritizing that when they were on the pill, all of a sudden the blinders are off. They see it, they love it, they're attracted to it, their relationship satisfaction goes up, their sexual desire in the relationship goes up. And if the opposite happens, it's the opposite. And we just
so do women on the pill pick friends as mates? And
interesting. I've never seen a study looking at that, but I mean, it wouldn't be a far stretch to make that prediction just because it does seem like women who are choosing their partners on the pill, if there's a pattern that's found, the pattern is that women are generally zeroing in on qualities that have less to do with sexiness and sexual desire and masculinity, and more zeroing in on things like safety and is this
nurturance, companionship.
Yeah, exactly. And so
well, you can see that women have a very, very difficult choice to make, right? Because they want to pick a guy who can win a competition with other guys. Mm-hmm. They want to pick a guy who can keep the psychopaths at bay. Mm-hmm. They want to pick a guy who's productive.
No, they actually want to pick the psychopaths, Jordan. They would much rather pair with a psychopath than a non-psychopath.
But they also need to pick someone who's generous and capable of forming responsible relationships. Well,
gee, thanks, Jordan, for pointing out the basics of hypergamy. Okay. Women have a choice. It is a dual mating choice, dual mating strategy, dual mating, whatever the fuck it is. Okay. Women will need a guy who can, slit throats and change diapers in the same day, right? That's quoting Justin Waller. Alpha fucks, beta bucks. Women will break rules for alphas and make more rules for betas. Okay. Well, if you're always on birth control, would it not stand to reason that you have a preference for more like feminized, more soft, more beta male men? Can we not simplify it this way? Can we say women who are on hormonal birth control prefer betas over guys who they would not necessarily want to get with? Now, I've done my own research on this because people used to ask me this back in 2017, 2018. They would say, well, Rolla, what about women who are on hormonal birth control, right? Does that not affect them in some way? I've actually had conversations with some researchers here, Hazelton one, others as well. Like they addressed this before. And the data that I've seen and the data that I've gotten from trying to think. It was not Gang. It might have been Hazelton, but she's actually answered this on a couple of occasions. And to my knowledge, it's that the intensity of the I don't say the loop, but the proliferative phase to the luteal phase is in sort of that cycle gets compressed or depressed. And now I have Miguel here, who brought me something. What'd you get? Oh my goodness. Anyways, let me finish this up before I bring Miguel on here.
You know,
Yeah.
talk about a play of opposites. And you could imagine that any shift in hormonal balance is going to skew that in one direction or another.
Right. Yeah. I mean, for partner choice, I always tell my women in my class and also the men, the few men that are in my class, because it's a university and it's all women now. But what I tell them is it's all about making trade-offs,
Yeah.
right? And sort of which side of the, table you're stacking your coins. Are you stacking your coins more on the sort of sexiness, keeping the psychopaths at bay, kind of masculinity types of qualities? Or are you stacking your chips all the way over here of good caregiver, provider, going to help, with the children? Are you putting them more toward the middle? Everybody makes a trade-off. And essentially what our hormones do is they kind of nudge where we put our stack.
Yeah.
And what we can see when this happens en masse is you can see en masse changes in partner preferences potentially.